Hey everybody, Josh Galacci here once again with rotocurve.com, and I'm here to discuss Week 14 GPP Guaranteed Prize Pool tournament picks for FanDuel. These are the guys that have high upside. These are the guys that are also very risky, but they have really high upside. They can score a ton of points, which is exactly what we want to target in tournaments. These are the tournaments that you see that have the buy-ins anywhere between one, and there's also tournaments where you can pay hundreds of dollars to enter. But these are the ones that are only the top 18 to 22% cash, so you're going to need a lot of points. So basically what we're targeting here are guys that can score a ton of points, that have the insane upside, but they also carry some risk to them as well. So these guys aren't necessarily good options to use in 50-50s and head-to-heads. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Two quarterbacks that I like this week are Blake Bortles and Jay Cutler. I like Bortles at 7,700 against Indianapolis because Bortles has been a top fantasy quarterback this season, averaging less FanDuel points than just four quarterbacks. And those quarterbacks are Cam Newton, Tom Brady, Andy Dalton, and I believe Carson Palmer. So he's in great company. And just 7,700 is actually a little bit of a value considering what he can perform in terms of production and fantasy points. In tournaments, we're looking for three times a player's salary, which would be just around 180 FanDuel points if you have everybody hit 3 times salary. Now, 180 FanDuel points is an excellent week. That's not a realistic target, but just saying if you can have everybody hit 3 times target, that's exactly what you're going to be ending up with. And considering Bortles is 7,700, we're looking for anywhere just around 24 FanDuel points. He has at least 24 3 times in the last 8 games, but he also has at least 22 5 times in the last 8 games. So Bortles does have the upside to put up 3 times salary, and considering he's going to be facing the Indianapolis Colts, who have given up at least 15 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks in all but one game this season, that makes him an excellent option. The other quarterback is Jay Cutler for the Chicago Bears at 6,700 against the Redskins. Cutler's production has really fallen off in the last few weeks, but so is his price, and that means he's going to make for an excellent contrarian play against the Redskins, which is a good matchup for him. Washington has allowed 2 or more touchdowns in 8 games this season, so it has shown that they have given up a bunch of big games to quarterbacks, and at just 6,700, any production over 20 points is excellent value for his price. A lot of people talk about value in NFL DFS, and just one quick thing I wanted to talk about is if you are targeting value, you're looking at people that have 2 times salary, 3 times salary, that does end up being perfect for your production at the end, but it is unrealistic to assume everybody's going to be able to get 2 or 3 times salary because you're relying on a ton of fantasy points and situations to do that. That being said, when it comes to quarterback, I do think you need to target 3 times because they do have the opportunity to more than anybody else in terms of production and of situations, as they do pass the ball and some do run the ball. So moving on to those guys that do run the ball most often, that's running backs. For this week, I like 3 guys that have decent upside, but sometimes they've struggled in terms of their floor. And that's exactly what a GPP play is. And the first one is LaShawn McCoy for the Buffalo Bills against Philadelphia Eagles. All week, people are talking about LaShawn McCoy facing his former team in the Eagles. He seems determined to start a feud with Chip Kelly and the Eagles. And all narratives aside, he still has a good matchup against the Eagles, considering the Eagles have given up 20 FanDuel points or more in 4 straight games. But in their last 3 games, they've given up over 30 FanDuel points to running backs in each of the last 3 weeks. So they have struggled immensely against the run and against running backs. A lot of that production has come through the air as well. So if McCoy sees his way into the passing game as well, and he has a few games with 5 or more catches, so he does have that ability. But the one thing about the Eagles is before the last few weeks, they were very good against the run. I believe they held running backs to below 100 yards again in the last 2 weeks as well, with most of the damage coming in the passing game. Considering the Buffalo Bills run the ball often, they have among the most carries in the NFL. I don't necessarily think I can use McCoy in cash games simply because with $100 more, you can get Doug Martin. That being said, he is an excellent target in tournaments because he has a lot of things going for him that could point in a 20-plus point FanDuel production day. The next guy is Darren Sproles, Philadelphia Eagles at 5,100, playing against LaShawn McCoy in Buffalo. And the one thing about Sproles is he has game-breaking ability, meaning that at any given time, at any given play, he can break a touchdown. We saw that with a punt return last week against the New England Patriots. And the one thing about the Eagles running back situation, DeMarco Murray's role is in flux. Ryan Matthews is coming back. Kenyon Barner got a few touches last week. But Murray doesn't necessarily have a lock on getting playing time or carries, as he has struggled this season. And I think that means that Darren Sproles is going to see a lot of touches once again. We saw last week what happens when he is featured, as he had 100 yards and on 19 touches. And the one thing about the Eagles is they will run a lot of plays, regardless if they score a lot of points. They will run a lot of plays, and the more plays, the more opportunities. The more opportunities, the more fantasy points. So if Darren Sproles plays a lot of snaps again this week, which I think he could against the Buffalo Bills team, I expect him to be a decent tournament play this week at just 5,100 on FanDuel. The last guy is a guy at minimum price, and he's at minimum price because news just came out that Mark Ingram will miss the remainder of the season. So that means that Tim Hightower could be the starting running back for the New Orleans Saints. Now, I don't think he's going to be the featured back. C.J. Spiller is there. He's going to play passing down. He's going to play third down. And Hightower could see first and second downs. But at just 4,500, he's worth a look because he could have 12 to 15 carries. One thing with Hightower is he only has, I believe I saw, a dozen carries in 2011, all of them coming this year. And he really hasn't played much of late. And before he kind of took a little bit of a vacation from the NFL, he was a decent back for the Cardinals. He was a decent back, I believe, at University of Richmond, kind of a bruiser in between the tackles. So if you're looking at the Saints to maybe do a little bit of power running, which they did a little bit with Mark Ingram, Hightower would be your guy against the Bucs. But I just don't see him being worth used in cash games simply because the fact that C.J. Spiller is expected to take a lot of touches. And they do have a versatile back by the name of Marcus Murphy that can touch the ball as well. So at just 4,500, I think he's worth a shot against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Simply because of his price, and he could see goal line carries. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as you can see, haven't allowed a rushing touchdown since week 3, which also makes him just a GPP play as well. So I would not use Hightower in cash games unless some crazy news comes out that he's supposed to see 20 touches or so. But considering the fact that he is just 4,500, it's worth a shot in GPPs. Wide receiver this week, there are 3 guys here that are very talented receivers, and they probably will be lower owned than they should simply because of volatility in production, role, or matchup, depending on what you're looking at. The first one is Sammy Watkins this week, and I think he is an excellent tournament play against the Eagles because the Eagles have given up the most FanDuel points to opposing receivers this season. And if you look at Sammy Watkins' games this season, he's the definition of a GPP play. He has games of 5, 3, 4, 0, and 1 FanDuel points, which is really poor production. But in contrary, he has games of 15, 27, 31, and 18 FanDuel points. Now, these are the games you're looking for tournaments. And considering he has the best matchup for opposing receivers this week against the Eagles, I think this could be one of those big weeks. Now, the one thing with Watkins and the Bills is Tyrod Taylor in that offense does not throw the ball often. That's why Sammy Watkins doesn't have that many targets or catches. But he is a big play threat, and considering the Eagles really struggle in the secondary this season, especially with those 2 corners and Byron Maxwell and now Eric Rowe, I think that Watkins would make an excellent play at 7,200 in tournaments. I cannot use him in cash, though, because of the volatility in his production. The next guy is Vincent Jackson for the Tampa Bay Bucs against the Saints. Jackson has an excellent matchup against the Saints secondary that has been torched so far this season. They've given up 20 touchdown passes, which is tied with the Eagles for the most in the NFL. And considering the fact that most people will be on Mike Evans as that top receiver for the Tampa Bay Bucs, that makes Vincent Jackson a lower owned possibility. But he does have the same matchup, and he has caught a touchdown pass earlier this year against the Saints. So I think that Winston's going to throw the ball a lot. He's going to throw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns. And some of that production has to go to Vincent Jackson. So at 6,800, it is a bit pricey, but I expect him to be very low owned. So it's worth taking a flyer on him in GPP. The third guy is Alshon Jeffrey, against for the Chicago Bears against the Washington Redskins. The reason why I like Jeffrey this week is because you can use him with a stack with Cutler for just about over 13,000 on FanDuel. These 2 guys have really struggled in the past 3 weeks. We talked about Cutler earlier in this video. And the thing with Jeffrey is he saw a ton of catches earlier this season. He had a 3-game stretch with 28 catches before his last 3 games, where he only has 14. That's really going to make them lower owned because a lot of people will target recency in fantasy sports and definitely in daily fantasy sports. But the one thing about the Redskins is they have struggled against receivers this season, giving up almost 31 FanDuel points per game. And when you look at the Bears, Alshon Jeffrey is the guy in the passing game. He has the most targets, catches, yards, touchdowns. He's that #1 target for Jay Cutler and the Bears passing offense. So a majority of those 31 FanDuel points per game, if that does happen again and the status quo for what the Washington Redskins have allowed, most of that will go to Alshon Jeffrey. So he is worth a play in tournaments this week and a good matchup. Moving on to tight ends, there are 2 cheap guys here that I think are worth playing. One guy is a guy that might be higher owned. The other guy is going to be one of the most lower owned players across the board, but he has a decent matchup. We'll talk about them right now. Scott Chandler has been the tight end for the Patriots since Rob Gronkowski's gone down, and he's actually been really productive in the last, I believe he has 6 quarters as a starter as Gronkowski got hurt 2 weeks ago. Chandler, since that time, is 9 catches for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. And in the 2 games that he's played, have had tough matchups. Faces the Eagles, who are #2 or #3 in the NFL in guarding the tight end, and the Broncos obviously have one of the better defenses in the NFL. So considering the fact that he's scored a touchdown in each game against those defenses, he does have 4 or more catches in both games. Does have around 60 yards in both games, and it makes him an excellent option in tournaments because he is just 5,800. Tom Brady doesn't have any other receivers in the red zone that he necessarily will want to throw to often, as they're smaller guys that can't necessarily go up in the end zone to catch passes. And at Chandler's height, I believe he's 6'7". It makes for a top red zone target for Tom Brady, who will be throwing the ball often against the Houston Texans. The other guy I like this week is strictly a matchup play. He's not been productive at all this season for either team, and that's Vernon Davis, plays for the Denver Broncos at 5,200. He does face the Oakland Raiders, though, and we've talked about the Raiders matchup before and a lot this season, as they've given up a touchdown to tight ends in all but 3 games. They've given up the 4th most FanDuel points to opposing tight ends, and they seem to struggle against pretty much anybody in the red zone when they look at tight end. We saw random tight ends catch passes in the end zone against them all year. Guys like Rhett Ellison, backup tight end for the Jets, guys that we haven't really heard of. And Vernon Davis is still one of the top athletes at the tight end position. He has struggled a ton this year in terms of production, but that matchup against the Oakland Raiders, I think he's worth throwing as a dart in there. If you are starting Brock Osweiler against them, you can use Osweiler and Vernon Davis combined to get a very good stack in terms of GPP production, because you can get the 2 of them for, I believe, just over or just under 12,000. That's an interesting play because the 2 of those guys, if they do connect for a touchdown or 2, which is very capable against the Oakland Raiders secondary, you still have a ton of cap space left to spend on top tier players like Devontae Freeman or Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, guys like that. So that basically wraps up the video for this week for GPPs and tournaments. All these players have a lot of upside. They also come with risk too, so be sure to remember that and don't spend on them in cash game. But in tournaments, they are worth plays. Be sure to give us a thumbs up so we can continue to bring you analysis each and every week on rotocurve.com. And as always, everything up on the site is free. Free tools, free analysis, free research data tools that you can use for your research each and every week for NFL. And as always, there's a great community of players over there. The live chat is up and running all the time. So you be sure to pop in, ask a question here, talk to everybody about their lineups. And as always, be sure to use everything to your advantage to help you win this week and every week in NFL DFS. Good luck, everyone.